Darth Vader stood on the bridge of the Executor, the vastness of space stretching out before him. The quiet hum of the Star Destroyer's engines was a stark contrast to the storm within him. His breathing, the mechanical rasp that defined his existence, echoed through the silent observation deck. For all his power, for all his dominance over the galaxy, there was an emptiness he could not fill, a chasm he could not cross. The galaxy feared him, and rightfully so. He was the enforcer of the Emperor's will, the bringer of death to those who defied the Empire. Yet, in the solitude of his mind, the faces of the past haunted him. Each one was a fragment of a life he had forsaken, a reminder of the man he once was. The name Anakin Skywalker felt like a ghost, a title that no longer belonged to him, and yet it lingered, a cruel whisper of what could have been. The point of no return had come and gone long ago. When he had knelt before Darth Sidious, pledging himself to the dark side, he had believed it was a necessary sacrifice. Padmé's life had hung in the balance, and the power promised to him seemed the only way to save her. But she was gone. His descent into darkness had not saved her. Instead, it had destroyed her. The realization of her death had left a wound that even the dark side could not numb. He had slaughtered the Jedi, betrayed his friends, and cast aside every value he once held, all for nothing. Memories of Mustafar burned in his mind as vividly as the lava rivers that had scarred his body. The moment he ignited his lightsaber against Obi-Wan, he knew there was no turning back. His former master's anguished face, the fiery duel, and the devastating final blow, it all played out in his mind endlessly. The words Obi-Wan had spoken before leaving him to die still echoed, "You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you." Even in his rage, he had felt the weight of those words, but he had buried it beneath layers of anger and pain. Vader's path since then had been one of unrelenting darkness. He had convinced himself that the Jedi were traitors, that they had brought their fate upon themselves. Yet even as he hunted them down, some part of him longed for their defiance. Each duel with a surviving Jedi was a grim reminder of what he had lost. Their lightsabers, once symbols of peace and justice, now lay cold and lifeless in his trophy collection. He claimed these victories for the Empire, but they brought him no satisfaction. And then there was Luke. The revelation of his son's existence had shattered the walls Vader had so carefully built around his heart. At first, he saw Luke as a means to an end, a tool to overthrow the Emperor. But as their paths crossed, something more profound stirred within him. Luke's defiance, his unwavering belief in the good that still resided in Vader, was a light that pierced through the darkness. Vader had tried to extinguish it, to crush the hope his son carried, but he could not. The moment on Bespin's platform haunted him. His duel with Luke had been fierce, and he had tried to dominate him, as he had done with so many before. But when he uttered the fateful words, "I am your father," he had felt a strange vulnerability. He had expected fear, anger, or perhaps submission. Instead, Luke chose to fall, to deny the dark side, to refuse him. That moment was not a victory, it was a reminder of his failure as a father, of the life he could never reclaim. Even as the dark side surged through him, granting him power beyond imagination, it could not silence the whispers of regret. His dreams were plagued by visions of Padmé, her voice pleading with him to turn back, to remember who he was. In these dreams, she stood before him, her hand outstretched, but when he reached for her, she faded into nothingness. He would awaken, his mechanical breathing the only sound, and the void within him deeper than ever. Coruscant, the heart of the Empire, was a city that never slept, yet Vader found no comfort there. The grand halls of the Imperial Palace were cold and lifeless, filled with sycophants and schemers who feared him more than they respected him. The Emperor's presence was a constant shadow, his twisted grin a reminder of the dark pact that bound them. Vader's loyalty to Sidious was rooted in necessity, not faith. The Sith Master had taught him the ways of the dark side, had molded him into a weapon, but the promise of power had come at a terrible cost. With each passing year, Vader's body grew weaker. The suit that sustained him was both his salvation and his prison. It amplified his strength, allowed him to wield the dark side with devastating force, but it also isolated him from the world. He could no longer feel the warmth of the sun, the touch of another's hand, or even the simple pleasure of breathing freely. His existence was a constant reminder of his failures, of the man he could never be again. Vader's regret was not just for the lives he had taken or the friends he had betrayed, it was for the life he had abandoned. Anakin Skywalker had dreamed of bringing balance to the Force, of ending the suffering he had witnessed throughout the galaxy. But in his quest for power, he had become the very thing he swore to destroy. The Clone Wars, the battles fought in the name of peace, now seemed like a cruel joke. The Republic he had once served was gone, replaced by an empire built on fear and oppression. In rare moments of solitude, Vader would meditate, seeking clarity through the Force. But even here, the light eluded him. The dark side clouded his visions, twisting them into nightmares. He saw flashes of the future, glimpses of his own demise, and the rise of his son. The Force spoke to him in riddles, offering no solace, only the harsh truth of his destiny. He was a pawn in a larger game, a piece on the board that could be sacrificed at any moment. Yet, despite his regrets, Vader could not bring himself to abandon the dark side. It was all he had left, the only thing that gave his existence purpose. To turn away now would be to admit defeat, to acknowledge that everything he had done was for nothing. And so, he pressed on, a shadow of the man he once was, clinging to the hope that somehow, in some way, his actions might still bring about the change he once believed in. The galaxy remained unaware of the conflict within him. To them, Darth Vader was a figure of absolute power, an unstoppable force of nature. They did not see the man beneath the mask, the broken soul yearning for redemption. But the mask was his shield, his armor against a world that could never understand his pain. And so he wore it with pride, even as it weighed heavier on his spirit with each passing day. Vader's journey was one of contradictions. He was a Sith, a master of the dark side, yet his heart was still haunted by the light. He was a warrior, a conqueror, yet he longed for peace. In the end, his regrets were a testament to his humanity, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the spark of Anakin Skywalker had not been entirely extinguished. The weight of his choices bore down on him, but he carried it in silence. For he knew that redemption, if it ever came, would not be granted easily. It would require a sacrifice, a moment of clarity where he would have to confront his past and choose his path. Until that day, Darth Vader would remain what the galaxy saw a harbinger of doom, a symbol of the Empire's might. But within the cold, unyielding exterior, the man he once was continued to fight, a silent struggle against the darkness that consumed him. The Force was not done with him yet. In the solitude of his meditation chamber, Vader often reflected on his encounters with Luke. The boy had inherited more than just his bloodline. He carried with him a strength and conviction that Vader once believed he had lost forever. There was a purity in Luke's defiance, a refusal to be swayed by the promises of power or the threats of pain. Vader had tested him, tempted him with visions of conquest, and yet Luke remained steadfast, rejecting the dark side with a courage that both infuriated and inspired him. Their duel on the second Death Star was a turning point. As Luke unleashed his fury, momentarily succumbing to the anger Vader had stoked within him, the Sith Lord felt an unsettling mix of pride and sorrow. He recognized in Luke the same passion that had once driven Anakin Skywalker, the same fire that the Emperor had manipulated to bring him to his knees. But unlike Anakin, Luke pulled back. In that critical moment, he chose to reject the darkness, casting aside his weapon and declaring his allegiance to the light. "You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me." Those words reverberated through Vader's very core. For years, he had believed that the identity of Anakin Skywalker was dead and buried, replaced by the impenetrable darkness of Darth Vader. But Luke's defiance stirred something deep within him, a fragment of the man he once was, struggling to break free from the chains of the dark side. It was a reminder that the path of the Jedi, the ideals he had once sworn to uphold, was not entirely lost to him. The Emperor's laughter echoed through the throne room, a cruel and mocking sound that sent a chill through Vader's mechanical frame. Palpatine had orchestrated this confrontation, manipulating father and son as easily as a master puppeteer. When the Emperor turned his wrath upon Luke, unleashing a torrent of Sith lightning, Vader watched in silence at first, paralyzed by the weight of his choices. His son writhed in agony, calling out to him not as an enemy, but as a father. "Father, please." It was a plea that cut through the darkness, striking a chord that had long been dormant within him. In that moment, the mask of Darth Vader began to crack. The memories flooded back the promises he had made to Padme, the dreams of a better galaxy, the love he had felt for his family. He had lost everything in his pursuit of power, but here, now, he was faced with a choice. He could remain a servant of the dark side, an instrument of the Emperor's will, or he could reclaim the part of himself that still clung to hope. As Palpatine continued his assault, Vader made his decision. The power of the dark side, the fear that had bound him to the Emperor, fell away. With a surge of strength, he seized the frail, decrepit body of his master and lifted him high into the air. The Dark Lord's screams filled the chamber as Vader hurled him into the abyss, ending the reign of the Sith and fulfilling the prophecy he had once believed to be a cruel joke. In the aftermath, the silence was deafening. The Emperor was gone, and with him, the suffocating grip of the dark side began to loosen. Vader, mortally wounded by the Emperor's lightning, collapsed beside his son. Luke, battered but alive, cradled his father in his arms, his face a mixture of grief and relief. For the first time in decades, Vader felt the warmth of another's presence, unfiltered by the cold confines of his armor. The mask that had defined him, that had been both his strength and his prison, was removed. Luke looked upon the face of Anakin Skywalker, scarred and pale, but unmistakably human. In that moment, the last vestiges of Darth Vader fell away, leaving only a father, reunited with his son. "You were right, Luke. You were right about me." The words came with difficulty, each one a reminder of the time he had lost and the redemption he had almost let slip away. He could feel the life fading from his broken body, but for the first time in years he felt at peace. The conflict that had raged within him for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet acceptance. He had been given a chance to atone for his sins, to protect his son, and in doing so, he had found a measure of redemption. Luke's tears fell freely as he tried to hold on to his father, but Anakin knew his time was short. He spoke his final words with the same love and hope he had once shared with Padme, urging his son to continue the fight, to rebuild the galaxy and restore the balance that had been lost. As the light of the Force enveloped him, Anakin Skywalker passed into the next life, leaving behind the legacy of Darth Vader and reclaiming the identity he had thought lost forever. In the quiet moments that followed, Luke prepared a pyre for his father on the forest moon of Endor. The flames consumed the armor that had once inspired fear across the galaxy, a symbolic end to the darkness that had shrouded Anakin's soul. As the fire burned, Luke felt a profound sense of closure. He had brought his father back to the light, fulfilling a destiny that had been written long before either of them had realized. But Anakin's story did not end with his death. In the ethereal plane of the Force, he found peace alongside the spirits of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. The burden of his past was lifted, and for the first time in decades, he could look upon his former master without shame. They stood together, united in the light, watching over the new hope of the galaxy. Though the scars of his actions would remain, Anakin Skywalker had found redemption. He had been to the depths of darkness and back, and in his final act, he had broken the cycle of fear and oppression that had defined his life. The galaxy would remember Darth Vader as a tyrant, a destroyer of worlds, but those who knew the truth would remember the man who had once been a hero, and who, in the end, became one again. The Force had always been a part of him, guiding him through his greatest triumphs and darkest failures. And now, as he stood among the stars, Anakin Skywalker knew that his journey was complete. The regrets that had haunted him were no longer chains, but lessons, reminders of the cost of his choices and the power of redemption. In the endless expanse of the Force, he had found peace, and his legacy would endure not as a symbol of the Empire's might, but as a testament to the enduring power of hope and love. Luke Skywalker's determination had rekindled the dormant spirit of Anakin Skywalker, but it had also left Vader with a stark realization of how deeply he had betrayed not only himself but everyone he had once sworn to protect. The weight of his past choices bore down on him, even as he stood, moments before his death, in the embrace of the Force. In those final moments, as the battle station crumbled around them, Vader's thoughts wandered back to the faces of those he had lost. Padme's memory loomed largest. He saw her standing in the Senate, her eyes filled with hope and conviction, a beacon of strength, even when surrounded by corruption. He remembered the way her laughter could light up the darkest of days, the way she had believed in him when no one else did. He had destroyed that light, consumed by his desperate need for control and his fear of loss. Vader's thoughts also drifted to the Jedi Order. Though he had come to despise them, their rigid adherence to rules and their blindness to the darkness rising within their ranks, he could not deny that their intentions had been noble. They had sought to preserve peace, to uphold justice across the galaxy. Masters like Mace Windu and Yoda, though flawed, had dedicated their lives to the service of others. Even Obi-Wan, the man he once called brother, had acted out of love and duty, not malice. Vader had chosen to see their actions as betrayals, but in truth, it was he who had betrayed them all. The younglings weighed heavily on his conscience. The massacre at the Jedi Temple was a wound that never truly healed. He could still see their faces, the fear and confusion in their eyes as he ignited his lightsaber. It was a moment that defined his transformation into Vader, a point of no return that he could never undo. He had told himself it was necessary, that it was a step toward creating a new order free from the flaws of the old, but deep down, he knew it was the ultimate act of cowardice, a surrender to the darkness within him. As the flames of his funeral pyre consumed the last vestiges of Darth Vader's armor, Anakin's spirit found solace in the presence of the Force. The weight of his regrets remained, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as a reminder of the path he had walked and the lessons he had learned. Redemption had come at a great cost, but it was a price he was willing to pay. In the afterlife, Anakin was greeted by the luminous forms of those who had guided him in life. Obi-Wan stood before him, a gentle smile on his face, free of the burden of their past conflicts. Anakin felt a wave of gratitude and shame, but Obi-Wan simply placed a hand on his shoulder, offering forgiveness without words. Yoda, too, acknowledged him with a solemn nod, recognizing the balance that had been restored through Anakin's sacrifice. But perhaps the most profound reunion was with Padme. Though she had long since passed from the physical world, her essence lingered in the Force, a light that had never truly left him. She appeared to him as she once was, radiant and full of life. There were no accusations, no anger, only love and understanding. In her presence, Anakin felt the weight of his guilt begin to lift. She had believed in him once, and now, in the embrace of the Force, she reminded him that even the darkest of paths could lead to the light. The galaxy would never know the full story of Darth Vader's fall and redemption. To the wider universe, he would remain a figure of fear and hatred, a symbol of the Empire's cruelty. But Luke would carry the truth, the knowledge that even the most lost souls could find their way back. The rebellion would speak of hope, of the power of love and forgiveness to overcome even the deepest scars. For Anakin, the journey was not about erasing his past, but accepting it. The horrors he had committed, the lives he had destroyed, they were a part of him, just as much as his victories and his moments of compassion. In the end, what mattered was the choice he made in those final moments, a choice that defined his true legacy. The Force, in its infinite wisdom, had always known that balance could only be achieved through understanding both the light and the dark. Anakin's life had been a testament to that truth. He had walked both paths, seen the extremes of each, and in doing so, he had become a bridge between them. His existence was a paradox, a tragedy, and ultimately, a redemption that echoed through the ages. As the Force enveloped him, Anakin felt a sense of purpose and peace he had not known since his days as a young Jedi, dreaming of freeing the galaxy from tyranny. His regrets, though still present, no longer consumed him. They were reminders of his humanity, of the choices that had shaped his destiny. In the vast expanse of the Force, he found a new kind of freedom, one that transcended the physical world and allowed him to watch over the galaxy he had both saved and scarred. Through Luke, Anakin's legacy would endure. The new generation of Jedi would rise, learning from the mistakes of the past and striving to create a future built on understanding and compassion. The cycle of conflict and fear that had plagued the galaxy for centuries had been broken, and in its place, there was hope. For Anakin Skywalker, that hope was enough. In the infinite expanse of the Force, Anakin Skywalker's presence lingered, a constant echo of both his triumphs and his failures. Though he had found peace, the weight of his life's choices remained a part of him, woven into the very fabric of his existence. The Force allowed him to witness the galaxy's unfolding, a silent observer to the rebuilding that followed the fall of the Empire. Luke's efforts to restore the Jedi Order filled Anakin with a quiet pride, but they also stirred memories of his own training, his own failures. The Jedi had been flawed in their rigidity, blind to the growing darkness until it was too late. He watched as Luke sought to build something new, a path that embraced balance rather than extremes. It was a vision Anakin could only wish had existed in his time, a middle ground where attachment was not forbidden but understood, where fear could be faced without succumbing to it. But Anakin's regrets extended beyond the Jedi Order and his own fall. The galaxy itself bore the scars of his actions. Entire worlds had been subjugated, their people enslaved or eradicated in the name of the Empire. The Death Star had obliterated Alderaan, a planet of peace and culture, its destruction a symbol of the Empire's ruthlessness. Anakin had not given the order, but he had been complicit, a silent enforcer of the regime that carried out such atrocities. He thought often of Leia, his daughter, whose life had been shaped by the consequences of his choices. Though she never knew him as her father, she had suffered under the weight of Vader's legacy. Her bravery, her resilience in the face of such immense loss, reminded Anakin of Padme. Leia carried her mother's strength, her unyielding spirit. Anakin felt a profound sadness knowing he could never make amends with her, that she would forever see him as the monster who had destroyed her world. Leia's unwavering dedication to the cause of the rebellion stood as a stark contrast to the darkness Anakin had embraced. He had once dreamed of ending oppression, of bringing peace to the galaxy, but his methods had led him down a path of destruction. In Leia, he saw the fulfillment of those dreams, a reminder that hope could persist even in the darkest of times. She was everything he had once aspired to be, and everything he had failed to become. As time passed, Anakin witnessed the galaxy's slow recovery. The New Republic struggled to establish itself, burdened by the remnants of the Empire and the challenges of uniting a fractured galaxy. There were moments of triumph, but also setbacks, and Anakin felt a pang of guilt, knowing that many of these struggles stemmed from the power he had once wielded. His influence had shaped the galaxy's history, and though he had sought redemption, the consequences of his actions would ripple through time. Even in death, Anakin's connection to the Force allowed him to feel the pull of the dark side. It lingered in the corners of the galaxy, a persistent shadow that could never be fully extinguished. The Sith were gone, but their ideology, their hunger for power, remained a threat. Anakin understood now more than ever that balance was a delicate thing, easily disrupted. It would take constant vigilance to maintain, and he hoped that Luke and the generations to come would rise to that challenge. Yet, for all his regrets and reflections, Anakin found solace in the knowledge that he had made a choice that had ultimately saved his son, his family, and the galaxy. Redemption had come at the cost of his life, but it had also restored his soul. The Force had granted him a second chance, not to undo the past, but to guide and inspire from beyond. He was no longer the Jedi Knight who had fallen to darkness, nor the Sith Lord who had terrorized the galaxy. He was something in between, a symbol of the struggle between light and dark, and the possibility of redemption even in the face of overwhelming regret. As he watched Luke continue his journey, Anakin felt a deep sense of hope. The future was uncertain, but it was filled with potential. The mistakes of the past could serve as lessons for the future, guiding those who sought to bring balance to the Force. Anakin's regrets would remain a part of him, but they no longer defined him. They were a testament to the complexity of his life, a reminder that even the most flawed beings could find their way back to the light. In the end, Anakin Skywalker was at peace. He had walked the darkest of paths, but he had emerged on the other side, forever changed. His legacy, though marked by pain and loss, was also one of hope and redemption. Through Luke, Leia, and the new generation of Jedi, the light he had once lost would continue to shine, guiding the galaxy toward a brighter future. And in the embrace of the Force, Anakin knew that he would always be there, a quiet guardian watching over the galaxy he had fought so hard to save.